Hey guys, subscribe for daily content. And if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks! What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got another interesting knife review / knife overview to share with you guys. This is the Kizer Jistice, designed by, I'll show you guys real quick, Ozo, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And then the other designer, I'm having a hard time pronouncing their name, but I want to make sure and show it. This is the newer version of this knife. It did exist in fully knife form a while back. I'm not sure how far back, but I noticed like on Blade HQ, it shows that it's discontinued. What I think is cool is the price is literally $4 difference from whenever the first one came out. There's also a fixed blade version of this, which I'm pretty sure I've shown on this channel. In any case, I believe Ozo was primarily behind all of them. And I think this is a cool knife. It's also a larger budget knife, which we don't usually see, or we don't see as often. So that's something I really, really like. But there's a lot of reasons to pick this up. This is going to be a pretty short review, a pretty straightforward review. Generally speaking, this is a very good knife. I think a lot of people will like it. I'm going to link it right down below in the description. It does help my channel when you use those links, but that's entirely up to you. Thanks so much to Kizer for sending it in. Thanks to my patrons for supporting me. And please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. Let's go ahead and measure it. Overall length is coming in at 8.5 inches, which is on the larger side. Not XL, but definitely on the larger side. Blade length is coming in at 3.75, and cutting edge is also coming in at 3.75. Very similar to like Shirogorov measurements. Shirogorov, we usually see 3.75 inch blade, 8.5 to 8.75 inch overall length. So that's cool. Let's go ahead and do some size comparisons up against custom scales that you find in this section can be found down in the description under Original Goat and others. So up against the 8010 and the 8020.5, you can see here this guy is all of the same length as the 8010, just not quite as robust. How about up against the Spyderco PM2 and the Spyderco Para 3? Once again, much closer to the size of the PM2, but larger and with way more cutting edge than the Spyderco PM2. How about up against the Benchmade Griptilian, or in this case, the Ritter Hogue and the Hogue Deca. All right, how's the action? This is, I'm not sure if they actually call this a Vanguard series knife, but it reminds me of like that tier. The action is very good, not just because the blade is big, because it is, there's a lot of weight in the blade, but the design of the flipper tab, the detent, the access to the lock bar, and the position of the flipper tab all make this a very enjoyable experience. The thumb studs are also on the larger side and are stepped pretty close to the way that I like them. It makes for a semi-comfortable deployment. Not as good as the flipper tab though. The flipper tab is definitely the way to go. But it's also, the detent is tuned properly to, accommodate for people who like a combination flipper and thumb stud setup. And this is just really good. Personally, I like knives that are slightly on the larger side, especially when we're talking about flipper and thumb stud combination. It just seems to work better and feel better. The leverage and position of my hand in relationship with where they're putting the thumb studs. This is the size of knife that I enjoy when I'm sitting around and fidgeting, because everything just feels like the right position, the right leverage. I just enjoy it. So if you're like me, right, I wear an XL glove. That doesn't mean my hands are enormous. There's many of you watching that have the same size hands, right? This is a knife that you're really going to enjoy. And if you have hands that are bigger than mine, you can see here, I've still got space left over, right? So even if your hands are smaller, I think this is still a knife that you might enjoy. There's a lot of comfort here. There's a lot of convenience here. So anyways, runs on bearings, by the way, but you probably could figure that out. Carry profile, thickness up against the Spyderco Para 3. It's a little bit thicker. We have full steel liners that are lipped and not nested. Right on top of that, not necessarily thick scales on top, but it's the fact that they're layered making this a little bit thicker. Length and height up against the PM2 and the Para 3. You can see here profile-wise, it is going to be similar in overall size to the Spyderco Para 3. Height-wise, including the flipper tab, it does approach the same height, right? So with that and the thickness, it's definitely a noticeable object. If you're like me and you're used to carrying larger knives, it's not going to be that big of a deal, right? But if you're used to carrying something like the PM2 or Para 3 in their G10 configurations, this is going to feel a little bit bigger, right? So if you like the larger size knives, you're going to be right at home. If you've been carrying smaller stuff, it's going to be a little bit of an adjustment, but this is nowhere near the size of a knife where I'd consider it to be like oversized or cumbersome to the vast majority of people. It's just something that some of you might have to adapt to. Let's go ahead and do, you know what, just because the calipers are right here, let's go ahead and do blade stock thickness first. It's not going to stand up, so we're going to have to hold it. That's fine. That's what she said. I'm so sorry. Okay. The blade stock thickness is coming in at 122. God, should I cut that out? No, I'm going to leave that in. 122,000. So really on the thinner side for blade stock thickness. Let's go ahead and get out my tools for a hardware check. As per usual, my tools are very inexpensive and very recommendable. You can find them right down there in the section, my description that talks about the tools I use in this channel, or in the pinned comment. The pivot, what incarnation here, Kizer? Oh, there we go. Okay, I was going to say, you did not give us a T6 pivot. That's not acceptable. T8 pivot and T8 body screws. Really cool, really nice T6 pocket clip screws, but lefties, hallelujah. You can actually carry this thing because they were sensible enough to mill out holes on the other side. So that's great. Very easy to take apart, maintain, disassemble, put back together, all of that. As long as you have the right tools for the job, you should be good to go. Weight. What are we looking at for materials? We're looking at micarta. By the way, yes, it does come in many different colors. Red, blue, maybe green. I don't know. But a bunch of different colors. Steel liners and an N690 blade, which I do not have a problem with because it falls into the budget territory, which in my opinion is where N690 should be. On the heavier side, definitely at 4.76 ounces, but not massively cumbersome. Just a little bit on the heavy side, right? If we say 4 ounce, I like to say under 4 ounces, kind of like more comfortable leaning into the lightweight. Under 3 ounces is definitely lightweight. When you get up well above the 4.5 ounce mark towards the 5 ounce mark, you start to get into the heavier territory. And that's just based on the fact that I've reviewed about, I don't know how many thousands of pocket knives right now, right? Just comparing with everything that I've handled. That's kind of how I come to that conclusion. Anyways, meat and potatoes time. I am a big fan of the profile here. I think this looks good. It has a very classic, almost folding steak knife look, which kind of also gives me a little bit Shirogorov-y vibes. Not really, but it does kind of have a lot of the same elements that I appreciate in a Shiro. Very close to, I would say closest to like the F95. It's just a really, really budgety version, right? It's kind of like the Chrysler 300 and the Rolls-Royce Phantom. Like, yeah, they kind of look similar, but not really. But that's not bad. That's a bad example. This is a very good, for what it costs, this is a great knife. I, in this case, actually really like the kind of denim micarta. I also like that they put these lines in here because otherwise it's just indistinguishable from like a billion other designs out there. And truthfully, because of the profile, it is kind of that. The thing that makes this special is in a sea of budget knives that, you know, are, well, in a sea of, you know, available knives out there in the budget world, the vast majority of them are under 8 inches. They, like, a lot of them are like 7.5 or less. Like, we have so many of those. And on top of that, what we have more than anything of, if you're thinking about becoming a knife designer, and this is no slight against people who have created designs like this in the past, it's fine. But if you're like, you know what, I feel like I could design a knife, and let me tell you what we've got enough of, okay? 7.5 inches, traditional knife handle profile, drop point blade, minimalist aesthetic. Holy crap, we have enough of those. We have plenty of them. We don't need any more, all right? Now, if that's your dream and you want to put your dream out there, you go ahead and do it, right? But it's going to be difficult because your competition is, holy crap, literally everybody. Like, everybody has made something like that, you know? What we don't have are an excess of larger knives, specifically 8.5 inches and up in the budget territory. Yes, they exist, but nowhere near to the same capacity that the smaller stuff does, right? So I appreciate it for that. This is an option for people who want something just straightforward, long, you know, drop point blade with a classic handle profile that's in the budget territory, that's made by a company like Kizer, who can produce a high quality knife. This is actually very comfortable. It's flat here, but the chamfering is substantial. It makes for a really comfortable, you know, handle profile. The pocket clip is also very good because it just drops down, and it's a slight spoonbill. Nowhere near that. Well, it's approaching 50%, but it's in a good spot. This is super, super comfortable. The thumb stud is definitely in the cutting path. I could argue that as good as the flipper is, we really didn't need the thumb studs, right? But many people are like, I hate flippers and I want a thumb stud, right? So it's not the biggest deal in the world, but just know if you choke up, right, the idea here, being able to choke up as close as possible to the initial cutting edge, what this allows you to do is if you're cutting into really thick material, you want to be as close as you can to that cutting edge safely so that all of that power, as much as possible, goes into that cut. Now, if you're cutting straight down and there's no thumb stud here, no problem. It'll just pass right through it. But that thumb stud is well into the cutting path, right? So you really have to cut kind of at an angle. That's a bummer in that specific circumstance, but that's a very specific circumstance. It's just something you should be aware of if you do that type of stuff with your pocket knife. Outside of that, though, cutting into packaging and stuff, yeah, no problem. It's a great blade profile, not super thick, nice tip. Really, honestly, fairly aggressive down to the final cutting apex, and it comes down to a relatively thin edge. Not a laser beam, but thin enough to make short work of light to medium materials, right? We have a satin finish. I would have just died to see Kizer's classic and beautiful high polished tumbled finish. I think they do some of the best tumbled finishes on the market, even when compared to knives that are 2 to 3 times more expensive than what they're making, but it's their satin finish and it looks fine. We of course have N690, which is okay. It's a super stainless. It's made by Bowler. This is an ingot steel. It's not a powder steel, despite what some people think. This is an ingot steel, but fine composition for sure. And I mean like literally fine grain structure. Your edge retention is going to be similar, I guess, to VG10 and 154cm. A long time ago, I used to kind of unfairly judge this steel because I had experiences with it that seemed lacking when compared to 154cm or VG10. I used to also misjudge VG10, but I either had bad heat treatments on some of those knives or I just didn't test everything substantially enough to know better. They're all right around the same ballpark, but I do prefer to see N690 under $75. And as we progress in time, the same has always been true for VG10, but I'm also liking, I would prefer to see 154cm fall under $75, and then the CPM or the powder formed version of it, which is CPM 154. Sure, you want to put that on your $150, $200 knives, right? Even much higher, actually. That's fine, but I want to see the powder form version on the higher stuff. So I think that's fine. I don't have a problem with it. N690, its claim to fame is that it is very stainless. If I'm not mistaken, it is quite a bit more stainless than both VG10 and 154cm, so that's great. It's not going to be a Vanax, it's not going to be an LC200N, but it is very, very stainless. So very easy to touch up and sharpen, by the way. The rest of this is pretty straightforward. You have a lanyard hole back here. You have a glass breaker for some reason, but it's small enough. I mean, it almost goes unnoticed, right? Big, thumbs up for them deciding to allow lefties to enjoy this because it is very easy to manipulate if you are left-handed. I am not left-handed. I am right-handed, and I can very easily manipulate this knife, so nice move there. I like that the liner and the backspacer is polished. That looks really good. We usually don't get that. It's usually just like a micarta backspacer. That's what I would have expected them to do, but they did a nice polished spacer here. That does add some weight in the butt end, though, so your balance is slightly back from where you'd expect it to be. That's not really that big of a deal, though. It's a large enough knife and the balance is close enough to this, primary index finger position that you're probably not going to notice it. So realistically, it's just a nice aesthetic touch. You have a stop pin that is located in its traditional spot with plenty of shouldering. No blade play up, down, left, or right. No lock stick. No double clutch. No pivot lash. Very smooth and consistent in here. In fact, completely fall shut. Nice detent, and we are, I think maybe oddly enough, slightly to the left. That's just a pivot tightening issue, most likely, and it is really close to being spot on. Very, very close. Probably an adjustment to the pivot, and the body screws will bring that center, as is usually the case. I have tutorials on how to do that, and I'm not super upset about it. This is a great knife. It comes in at $73. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that at all. I think this is very, very... Kizer does some of the best work at this territory. In the entirety of the knife world, they're offering really great value. I think this is well deserving of that price tag, and I'm really happy that we have knives out there that are this size, that are this price, built with some good materials for the price point, right, and good overall fit and finish. If you like knives that are slightly on the larger side and you're on a budget, this is definitely not a bad choice. I think this is really cool. And the design and the aesthetic is going to appeal to a wide range of people. It's a fantastic flipper. It's very easy to manipulate. And it's really going to be a convenient tool outside of the fact that that thumb stud is in the cutting path slightly. I mean, you got a good ½ an inch there. Probably would have been better without the thumb studs, but not a deal breaker. Definitely a great knife. It'll go on my most recommended knives playlist and my cheap knives I like playlist because it's under $75. That's going to be it today, guys. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.